new hammer, middle hammer, and old hammer fans alike. I am Old Grumpy Wolf, aka Lead and Midnight. Welcome to my tutorial for how I paint my 90s Grim Bright style Blood Angels. I've had a lot of questions via Reddit, Facebook, and Instagram on how I paint my Blood Angel Marines, and I hope this helps to answer those questions. Before we get too far into this, I want to say it's an absolute honor that I'm finally able to give back to the Warhammer 40,000 community in some small way. I've been painting on and off for over 30 years now, so this is really cool that I get to hopefully help some of you with your own painting. Fair warning though, this tutorial is not meant as a get your miniature painted in 20 minutes and on the tabletop kind of thing. There are plenty of tutorials on YouTube for that method, and this simply isn't one of them. This tutorial is meant to help you paint something a little bit more advanced that you would have on your shelf as a display piece. It does take practice to do this sort of thing, but with a little patience, anyone can make it happen. For this tutorial, I use a wide variety of paints from Pro Acryl and Vallejo Model Color displayed as MC in the materials shown on screen. I'm not a huge fan of current Citadel. I can't do this. I'm not a huge fan of Citadel's current formulation for their paints, but there are a few shown in this video. I work from a dry palette, which is a piece of glass I've had for over 20 years. I mix water into my paints and keep a small pool nearby so as to refresh what I'm working on as it dries out. It's basically a hybrid wet palette setup. I don't know what to call it. I've tried a wet palette though, and I'm just not a fan. But this is a personal preference, so whatever works for you, have at it. The methods of highlighting and blending I use are what people refer to as glazing or wet blending in modern times. You'll have to experiment with the paints that you have if you want to achieve this, as different brands require different amounts of water based on how heavily pigmented the paints themselves are, also what kind of acrylic medium they utilize. I'm a big fan of how Pro Acryl paints work for my style of painting due to being a very thin paint and having heavy amounts of pigment. AK, 2 thin coats, and Army Painter, War Painter also work really well for the methods I'm showing in this tutorial due to the rich pigmentation, and yes, I use those brands quite a bit in my own work. Just for reference, here is a complete shot and list of all the paints and materials I've used in this video in case you want to make a checklist or find a color conversion chart. If you have any other questions, feel free to contact me on my Old Grumpy Instagram, and I can't talk. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me on my Old Grumpy Wolf Instagram, and I will do my best to help you out. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy the video. Setup is fairly straightforward. Glue the mini to the base, take outside to prime, bring back in and base coat. For the base coat of the model, I use 2 or 3 very thinned out coats of Pro Acryl Pyrrole Red. After base coats are dry, I will heavily water down Vallejo Model Color Black and begin painting in the recesses of the armor using a small fine pointed brush. Try to stay somewhat neat while doing this, but don't worry about any mistakes as they can easily be fixed in the next step. Post black lining, I will use heavily watered down Vallejo Model Color White with a small fine brush to clean up any black that spilled over into the red. Keep your coats of white as thin as you can so as not to build up any excess paint or obscure any detail. If you make any mistakes after cleaning up black lining with white, you can water down some Vallejo Black again and fix the lines as black coats over white very easily. At this point, I need to clean up the white. I add water to Pro Acryl Pyrrole Red and begin painting over the white corrections. The white undercoat keeps the red being painted on the same color as the original base coat, and red coats over white very easily. Again, any mistakes during this process with red covering black, simply repeat watering down some Vallejo Model Color Black and carefully paint it into the recesses. Here is where I get to start bringing some life to the Mini. I will put both Pro Acryl Orange Red and Pro Acryl Orange on my palette. I'll grab some Orange Red and water it down quite a bit to a glaze-like consistency. From there, I will begin highlighting the armor plates. I make this highlight fairly large all over the model to give the red a subtle orange glow that will be built upon going forward. Keeping the paint a glaze-like consistency helps to create a gradient effect. Once I am happy with the red to orange highlight, I will begin mixing in various amounts of Pro Acryl Orange and continue to glaze on the colors in 2 to 3 steps of working more and more toward pure orange. I still keep the consistency very thin as to allow for smooth transitions. Finally, a highlight of pure thinned out orange is added. I sometimes do 2 to 3 thinned out highlights of orange to help increase its intensity. If needed, I will glaze the orange over the previous highlights to help add more gradation to the overall effect. Normally I paint the eyes in recessed black details post-red cleanup, so if there's any mistakes, they're very easy to correct. I block in the eyes with thinned out Vallejo model color dark blue and work up the highlights toward the center of his helmet on the eye lenses by mixing in Vallejo model color white. Once I'm happy with the highlights, I dot pure white in the corners of each eye lens. The jewel in the center of the Space Marine's chest is painted in the same manner with the same colors. All of the black details in between the legs and on the chest aquila are painted over with Vallejo model color basalt gray, leaving the black showing through in the recesses. From there, I begin mixing in Vallejo sky gray and continuing up the highlights in thinned, watered-down coats. For the final highlight, I'll do a 50-50 mix of thinned down sky gray and Vallejo model color white and apply this to the very edges of details. The built-in pouches are a very straightforward process. Due to the black lining done in the previous step, there should already be a separation line around all of these pieces, so they can be easily coated with Pro Acryl golden brown, leaving the black lines where they are. Once a few thin coats of dark golden brown are applied, I will wash all the brown with Citadel Agrax Earthshade, letting it run over the black lines. This gives some depth and separation to all the leather objects. From there, I cover most of the surface areas again with thinned out dark golden brown, and I'll begin to add in Pro Acryl bright ivory and apply highlights until I'm happy with how bright they are. Once finished, I will dot all the buttons with pure bright ivory. I prefer hand painting as many badges as I can on my miniatures, as it gives me good practice with brush control. I begin by drawing a rough shape of the blood drop on the knee pad using thinned out Pro Acryl bright ivory. Once I get the rough shape in place, making sure it's as centered as possible, I will undercoat the rest of the knee pad with the same bright ivory. Once consistent and dry, I'll go back through and clean up the blood drop on the knee pad with more Pyrrole red. When the knee pad is completely covered, I apply a few heavily watered down coats of Citadel Aerial Yellow so it covers the bright ivory base coat. The bright ivory creates a warm and consistent underbase for the Youre yellow to coat over. It's a good idea to undercoat yellow as it's a very thin color. Once the Youre yellow has dried, I simply just keep adding more Pro Acryl bright ivory to the mix to brighten up the yellow, and I finally end with a pure watered down highlight of bright ivory. With the yellow area complete, I'll go through and refine and clean up the blood drop on the knee if it needs it. I'll also start highlighting the blood drop by adding Pro Acryl orange to Pro Acryl Pyrrole red. Slowly mixing it in and just working it up just as I did the armor. The company badge on the leg is done by starting with a cross in the general area I want the circle in. I paint this on with heavily thinned out Vallejo black. From there, I connect the tops of the cross with curves like a circle. I generally don't get the size perfect immediately, so I carefully and slowly expand the circle outward, trying to keep it as consistent as possible. Once I'm happy with the size, I will begin filling in the center with thinned out Vallejo white. It's easy for me to get a consistent black outline by working out from the center with the white. Next, I make 3 dots where I want to draw the lightning bolt. I connect the dots with various lines using thinned out Vallejo black. From there, I fill in the center of the bolt and correct edges using Vallejo black and white as needed. Once the model is completely painted, I coat the top of my bases with Citadel Elysian Green, and the rim is painted with Citadel Doombull Brown. Once the Elysian Green is dried, I apply a fairly decent amount of Gorilla Superglue liquid to the base, being careful not to hit the model. From there, I work the glue around the base using a small flat toothpick and an X-Acto. Once fully covered, I dunk my minis in 2 different types of flock that I like. After the second flock is applied, I will clean up the outer rim of the base and the feet with an X-Acto knife. Because the glue is still wet, it comes off fairly easily. Once I'm happy with the base and the glue has dried, I'll take some thinned down Citadel Doombull Brown and recoat the rim of the base just to ensure it's a nice even coat and it looks good. From there, I'll take the model outside and shoot it with a coat of Citadel Minotaur varnish. Now that the body is finished up, it's time to paint the arms and backpack, along with doing the transfers and final assembly. The arms and backpack are painted using the same method shown earlier in the video. Nothing's changed. I undercoat my metallics in Vallejo Model Color Black. Then I thin down and paint Citadel Stormhost Silver over the top, leaving hard recesses completely black. From there, I mix up Citadel Black Legion, Known Oil, and water. I apply this mix over all of the metallic pieces. Once dry, I go back and highlight up with more Citadel Stormhost Silver until I'm happy with how the metallics look. The transfers are cut from their sheet and given multiple coats of microset until it pulls free from the backing paper. I'll give the surface the transfer is going on a coat of microset as well to let the transfer move around until I get it in the right place. Once set where I want, I dab the area with a cotton swab and let it dry. Once the transfer has dried, I take the arms and backpack outside and shoot with Citadel Munitorum varnish. Giving all the pieces I shot with Munitorum varnish at least 15 to 20 minutes to set up and dry, I finally go ahead with the final assembly. I dab on Gorilla Super Glue liquid where any part needs to go on the model, hold in place until set, and move on to the next piece. Once everything is properly glued in place, I take the Mini outside for one last thin coat of Citadel Munitorum varnish to get everything consistent looking. And here we are, a very dapper looking 1990s Grim Bright Blood Angel. So there you have it, a decent overview of how I paint my 90s Grim Bright Blood Angels. This video was insanely intense and challenging to make, and I hope it helps anyone watching with your own painting. Oh, in case you're wondering, Grim Bright is a term I adopted from a painter friend of mine on Instagram. She came up with the saying, and she was kind enough to let me use it as we share the same style of painting, and I decided to go full ham with it. It's a much easier thing to say than typing out 90s painting style, which is like a 75-point word in Scrabble. This video nor myself am endorsed or sponsored by any of the brands I've shown. I just have my personal preferences and love the brand of paints I use. I'll have more tutorial videos coming soon, including one for how I paint my space wolves, as I've gotten quite a few questions about that too. The next major project I have that's debuting will be a new podcast here on my YouTube channel, talking to other painters that I'm fond of and I like via Instagram. Just a way to let folks and their awesome minis shine and nerd out with another painter. I'm hoping to have the first episode of the podcast up in a few weeks, especially now that the tutorial's finally over and done with. A huge shout out going to Monument Hobbies who make Pro Acryl. You guys are amazing and it was awesome meeting all of you at LVO. If any of you want to check out any more of my minis, please feel free to find me on Instagram as Old Grumpy Wolf or on Reddit as Lennon Midnight. It would mean a ton to me if you liked, shared, and subscribed this video. You know, typical YouTuber thing to say, but it really does help guys like me. And until my next video, I'll talk to you guys in a bit.